I'm so impressed by, Lucas is young. We have to remember how young he is, right? And I think there are shades of Jet where his racing on a 450 doesn't really correlate with how young he is or kind of his personality off the motorcycle. And, I think it can go one of two ways when you move up. I think you can try to keep your same 250 approach. Like, let's say Justin Barsha, we're just high revving, high intensity, just you're attacking all the time. Or you can understand what the motorcycle will now allow you to do, and you don't have to ride at 12,000 RPM all the time, and the motorcycle works much more properly at a lower RPM. But that has to be a conscious decision from the rider, whether it's regardless of the rider on which continent. You have to understand that, and you have to like slow down and understand, okay, what am I actually trying to accomplish? I'm trying to be as efficient as possible, work with the motorcycle and what it wants to do and how it's going to handle in its best possible form. And when you watch Lucas ride, if you watch him ride last year versus this year, the intensity, the urgency, those things are much different, but his pace is as good or better. And I can't speak to whether that was something that he worked on with himself and his family, like, hey, this is a conscious thing, like I have to ride this motorcycle differently. Maybe DeCarly was a voice of help in that as well. But it's noticeable. Like when I watch him, he just looks so much more in control and patient and allows things to kind of happen on the racetrack, where I felt like on the 250 he was always trying to force things to happen. Like he was always pushing the narrative, pushing, in places where you couldn't push. Like he would be overriding the situation and get himself into trouble because of it. Now, when it worked, it was amazing and he would win GPs. But when it didn't work, he would be on his head and give points back to Kai. Multiple times that happened. This year, you just don't see him. Like in race 2 this weekend, he understood that he had the overall GP win. At the end of the race, he started pushing, like trying to close it, but he never forced anything. In the middle of the race, I'm sure he wanted to try to catch Fever. That's just who he is as a person. He wants to win. He's been very vocal his entire life about I want to win, but that urgency and the way he's going about it, he's not letting impatience kind of dictate his racecraft, which I always felt like he was doing in MX2. So yeah, it's incredible to watch riders mature right in front of your eyes, like in however many GPs we've had, 12 or whatever. But I think we've watched it with Lucas, and it doesn't mean he's impervious to mistakes. Like that can still happen, but the the jump from last year to this year has been incredible as far as his mental capacity for understanding, I think, the task. Understanding what am I supposed to be doing here other than just twisting the throttle. It's pretty incredible to watch. I don't think it's all that common to mature that much in simply one season. So yeah, BT, go at it. But I'm amazed at what I've seen from Lucas in a season, because his little brother has shades of everything that I thought that Lucas could be, and they could not be diverging more in the way that they go about their racing.
Yeah, you've touched on a number of things that I would have touched on as well, JT. I think I don't know them at all. Like I know a number of the riders over here, but obviously they're, young and I wasn't around when they've been coming up whatsoever. So I've only watched them like most people here listen to this podcast would have just through highlights, on YouTube and just whatever you see floating around the internet. And I've always thought that his base skills were phenomenal. They just have that extra little bit, those special riders that they do with certain pieces of the puzzle that other riders don't do. And I really have thought that he had that above many riders. And you're starting to see that shine through. And there's never coincidence in that, like give you an example. You go over the finish line. I'm not sure if you spotted this, JT, but I didn't get to watch the first moto. I was still busy cleaning up, and then I went out with Jag to watch the second moto. You go over the finish line, turn right, jump down the hill, and he was launching off the top of that hill, landing, and then as he would land, he would then jump over, I don't know, 3 or 4 braking bumps. He would miss, a good 5, 6 meters of that braking zone, and then set himself into that turn. And he's just doing just small, subtle. That's not small and subtle, but that's happening in multiple places on the track. Very jet esque, I guess you would say, in a sense. And another point that you touched on, just the way he's riding the motorcycle with throttle control. When you got to the bottom of that hill and you have that long left hand arc back up to the mechanics, and that is an extremely technical part of that track. You don't have much to bank off going into that turn. There's not much to work with. Then all of a sudden it's a wall, which is just, it's been there for about 30 years and is as rugged as hell. This year they put rollers in the base of that hill. So you had to work the bike to get going again. And then you went to nothing, not really in terms of traction as you got to I guess, the sharpest part of that uphill turn. The point I'm getting to is that as you could hear Roman Fevre, you could hear him the entire way from the base of that hill once he got on the power to the mechanics area. You couldn't hear Lucas's bike. He was just so light on the throttle and the way they controlled the power. It didn't actually look fast or sound fast, but I'm sure if you put a stopwatch on there on Lucas, it would have been quick, and just the way that he was very efficient with the bike through there. The one thing I think that stands out to me, and that's how you started with this point, is just how did the massive change, and it is a big change. If you look back over last season, especially, it was win or bust really is what it was, and it's just an enormous turnaround. Did that come off the back of those injuries? There's still very little that's actually known about what those injuries were. JT probably knows more than anyone, I'm sure. But it sounds like there was at least one broken arm, if not 2 broken arms in the preseason. Did that sort of change his approach and to the season and calm him down slightly to begin the season? Then all of a sudden he's realized, wow, I don't have to ride at 10 tenths all the time to be a contender. Was that a factor? Did going to a 450 in the off season, was there a real change of mindset, internally in their inner circle? Hey, you're going to need to change. You can't ride at 10 tenths like you have been. That's going to escalate far more than what it has this year. Was going to Decali a big part of that change, in terms of his mindset? They've got a lot of experience of won 7 or 8 world titles, 10 world titles with Caroli, so did that have a big influence on it? So I think there's just a number of factors that have led to him, and I can't say that any one of those factors are the reason why he's made such a big leap forward. The only thing that I can say is just his base riding skill is better than most. That is one thing that stands out. Just standing on the side of the track and watching him do what he was doing on Sunday was pretty cool to see. That close up.
Yeah, absolutely. JT, you're welcome to expand on just, those difference making sections on the track. Obviously, his line selection, the way he finds solutions to navigate the track, so fast and also efficiently. And I guess the way he's sort of managing the season as well. There's essentially 3 point scoring full-blooded motos every weekend, and he's managing it really well. So he deserves a lot of credit for that. The maturity, the discipline, just realizing when to push and when to, take it easy. So just your take on any of those other things. And if you shed any light on those injuries, that'd be pretty cool too. But it was a bit of an unknown, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do think there was significant injury to both arms. Whether the level of fracture or anything like that, they kept pretty close to the vest there. So I don't know, but you could see early in the season, like the celebration for, like, I think he got 5th at the opening round. For them to act like he had just won a world championship, for him to get a decent result, like, you could tell how unlikely him even racing was. And if there's a way, if this does play out and he wins this world championship, which who knows, it's 10 points. you'd have to look back at really the willingness to ride through what seemed like significant injury at the beginning to give him any chance. I don't think most people would have raced under that scenario, and I think a lot of people were questioning that decision making early on. It's like, hey, this kid has a real chance to be a superstar in the sport for a long time, and we're sending him out there with a significant injury in his first ever MXGP race. Like, this doesn't seem all that wise, but so far it seems like it was the best decision. As for kind of the way the track played out and those types of things, I think, BT hit on something there. It really seemed like in race 2, when the track started getting a little bit more hard packed, that helped Fevre. His skill set really started to show up in race 2. But on the other side of that coin, if you're looking at, championship type behavior and who is going to make critical mistakes at critical times, that last lap crash by Fevre looms large. Like, that was so uncharacteristic for him to give those points back. He had to be just kicking himself because the race it was really over, and for all intents and purposes, he was just kind of bringing it home. And for him to make the mistake and lose the front end, he had to be just so angry with himself after race 1 because, he gave back 4 or 5 points there that weren't really up for. They were uncontested by that point. He had already done the work. He had gotten by Panzer, which took him far too long, to be fair. Far too long. You simply cannot sit behind Panzer that long in that moment. If you're going to, and it's easy for me to say that, but just, doing my job and analyzing it, if a guy like as talented as Fevre is on a track where he has been so great, he had 3 wins going in, you can't sit behind Panzer in that moment for the better part of 20 minutes, right? And Lucas was left to his own devices out front. Like, he had no pressure. He could completely ride however he chose to. It's really on Fevre to up the pressure there and put Lucas in an uncomfortable spot. And when he looks back and he continues to see Panzer in second for however long, like, he's as comfortable. That's how you build a 20-second gap. You're riding around at whatever pace you feel you deem necessary. So I thought it was an okay weekend for Fevre. He gave 5 points back when all was said and done. But I think he certainly left some points on the table. And if the way it went, like, you could say that Lucas's race 2 changed because he had the overall GP win in hand, but it could have been very easily, the way it all went, it very easily could have been a net points positive for Fevre, 1 point. He should have gone 2-1, and Lucas had gone 1-2, and then the qualifying race on Saturday would have been the difference, a 1 point. So it should have really it's easy to say that. There's a lot of ifs and buts in racing, but there was absolutely no reason for Fevre to crash there at the end, and it should have been a 16-point, deficit or advantage leaving the day with Fevre holding the number 1 plate. But his own mistake cost him that, and we don't know how valuable those points will be when we get to Australia. But sitting here today with 7 GPs to go, it felt like that those points feel very valuable in the moment.